From the underground, that radical left-wing group, the Weathermen, has claimed responsibility for yesterday's dynamiting of a statue of a Chicago policeman. The group promises more attacks on the establishment around the entire country starting next week. The medium for this message was a tape recording, reputedly by the fugitive Weathermen leader Bernardine Dorn. It came by mail this morning in New York to the Youth International Party, the Yippies, who invited newsmen to hear it. Our Ben Silver was there as the tape was played.
Sisters and brothers, a year ago we blew away the Haymarket Pig statue at the start of the youth riot in Chicago. The head of the Police Sergeants Association called emotionally for all-out war between the pigs and us. We accepted. Last night we destroyed the pig again. This time it begins a fall offensive of youth resistance that will spread from Santa Barbara to Boston, back to Kent and Kansas. Now we are everywhere, and next week families and tribes will attack the enemy around the country. We are not just attacking targets, we are bringing a pitiful, helpless giant to its knees. We invite Key and Nixon and Agnew to travel in this country. Come to the high schools and campuses. But guard your planes, guard your colleges, guard your banks, guard your children, guard your doors.
Bernardine Ray Dorn Ornstein, born January 12, 1942, is a former leader of the Weather Underground domestic terror group, responsible for bombings of the United States Capitol, the Pentagon, and several police stations in New York, as well as the Greenwich Village townhouse explosion that killed 3 of its members. As a member of the Weather Underground, Dorn helped to create a declaration of a state of war against the United States government and was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, where she remained for 3 years. From 1991 to 2013, she was a clinical associate professor of law at the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University School of Law. She is married to Bill Ayers, a co-founder of the Weather Underground, who was formerly a tenured professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dorn was a principal signatory on the Weather Underground's Declaration of a State of War in May 1970 that formally declared war on the U.S. government and completed the group's transformation from political advocacy to violent action. She recorded the declaration and sent a transcript of a tape recording to the New York Times. Dorn also co-wrote with Bill Ayers and published the subversive manifesto Prairie Fire in 1974 and participated in the covertly filmed Underground in 1976. In late 1975, the Weather Underground put out an issue of a magazine, Also Watami, which carried an article by Dorn titled Our Class Struggle, described as a speech given to the organization's cadres on September 2nd of that year. In that article, Dorn clearly stated support for communist ideology. On August 22, 1969, Dorn was arrested in Chicago and charged with possession of drugs. The defense argued that Chicago police had conducted an illegal search of the car in which she was a passenger, which led Judge Kenneth R. Wendt of the Narcotics Court of Chicago to dismiss the charges. On September 20, 1969, at an anti-Vietnam rally at the Davis Cup tennis tournament in Cleveland, police arrested Dorn and 20 other persons on charges of disorderly conduct. On September 26, 1969, Dorn was arrested again in Chicago during a rally in support of the 8 men accused of conspiracy concerning the riot during the 1968 Democratic National Convention, who were being tried on riot conspiracy charges. Dorn was next arrested on October 9, 1969 by the Chicago police during a rally for the women's faction of the Weathermen group and was later released on a $1,000 bond. On October 31, 1969, a grand jury indicted 22 people, including Dorn, for their involvement with the trial of the Chicago 8, and she was again indicted on April 2, 1970, when a federal grand jury indicted 12 members of the Weathermen group on conspiracy charges in violation of anti-riot acts during the Days of Rage. However, all of these convictions were reversed on November 21, 1972 by the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit on the basis the judge was biased in his refusal to permit defense attorneys to screen prospective jurors for cultural and racial bias. Due to the increasing volatility of the Weather Underground led by Dorn, on October 14, 1970, Bernardine Ray Dorn was added to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list and was only removed in December 1973 after District Court Judge Damon Keith dismissed the case against the Weathermen. That dismissal was followed shortly by another when on January 3, 1974, Judge Julius Hoffman dismissed a 4-year-old case against 12 members of the Weathermen faction of the Students for a Democratic Society, including Dorn. She had been charged with leading the riotous Days of Rage. While on the run from police, Dorn used many aliases, including Bernardine Ray Ornstein, H.T. Smith, and Marion Delgado, and married another Weatherman leader, Bill Ayers, with whom she has 2 children. During the last years of their underground life, Dorn and Ayers resided in Chicago, where they used the aliases Christine Louise Douglas and Anthony J. Lee. In the late 1970s, the Weathermen group split into 2 factions, the May 19th Coalition and the Prairie Fire Collective, with Dorn and Ayers in the latter. The Prairie Fire Collective favored coming out of hiding, with members facing the criminal charges against them, while the May 19th Coalition remained in hiding. A decisive factor in Dorn's coming out of hiding were her concerns about her children. The couple turned themselves in to authorities in 1980, while some charges relating to their activities with the Weathermen were dropped due to prosecutorial misconduct. Dorn pleaded guilty to charges of aggravated battery and bail jumping, for which she was put on probation. After refusing to testify against ex-Weatherman Susan Rosenberg in an armed robbery case, she served just less than a year in prison. Shortly after turning themselves in, Dorn and Ayers became legal guardians of Chesa Boudin, the son of former members of the Weather Underground, Kathy Boudin and David Gilbert, after the couple were convicted of murder for their roles in a 1981 armed car robbery. From 1984 to 1988, Dorn was employed by the Chicago law firm Sidley Austin, where she was hired by Howard Trenans, the head of the firm who knew Thomas G. Ayers, Dorn's father-in-law. "We often hire friends," Trenan told a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. However, Dorn had not been admitted to the New York or Illinois bar, even though she had passed both bar exams, because she had not submitted an application to the New York Supreme Court's Committee on Character and Fitness. Similarly, she was turned down by the Illinois Ethics Committee because of her criminal record. Trenan said of the Illinois rejection, "Dorn didn't get a law license because she's stubborn. She wouldn't say she's sorry." In 1994, Dorn said of her political beliefs, "I still see myself as a radical." On November 4th, 2010, Dorn was interviewed by NewsClick India about the right in the U.S. She said, "It's racist, it's armed, it's hostile, it's unspeakable," referring to the Restoring Honor rally, which was promoted by Glenn Beck and held on August 28, 2010 at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. "You have white people armed, demanding the end to the Obama presidency." She also stated, "The real terrorist is the American government, state terrorism unleashed against the world." In 2008, Dorn and Ayers resurfaced into news headlines as presidential candidate John McCain and his running mate Sarah Palin publicly denounced the ties between Ayers and then presidential candidate Barack Obama. Thomas G. Ayers, father of William Ayers, was born on February 16, 1915 in Detroit, Michigan. From 1964 to 1980, he served as president, CEO, and chairman of Commonwealth Edison, otherwise known as ComEd, the largest electric utility in Illinois. Ayers served as chairman of the Board of Trustees of Northwestern University, the Erickson Institute, the Bank Street College of Education in New York City, the Chicago Symphony, the Chicago Community Trust, the Chicago Urban League, the Community Renewal Society, the Chicago Association of Commerce and Industry, Chicago United, the Leadership Council for Metropolitan Open Communities, and Dearborn Park Corporation, and served as vice president of the Chicago Board of Education. Ayers also served on the board of directors of Sears, G.D. Searle, Chicago Pacific Corp., Zenith Corp., Northwest Industries, General Dynamics Corp. of St. Louis, First National Bank of Chicago, the Chicago Cubs, and the Tribune Company. Other notable names on the board of directors of the First National Bank of Chicago were A. Robert Abood, John E. Drick, and Gaylord Freeman. Freeman and Drick were not only members, but Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, which presides over the learned elders of Sion of the 33rd degree. Ayers also helped negotiate the first labor contract between Con Ed and the 12,000-member International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Ayers was well aware that the real power in Chicago came from championing the plight of the black community. When Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. brought his open house campaign to
I want to be president of the United States.
Are you certain that this was the young black male you saw in front of the Ayers home?
I am absolutely positive that it was Barack Obama. What I distinctly remember her saying in her description of him, that was in the sentence that he was a foreign student.
Yet there was still one more connection between Ayers, Obama, and Dorn, the law firm of Sidley Austin. Sidley Austin LLP, formerly known as Sidley Austin Brown and Wood LLP, is a general practice law firm based in the United States with a focus on expertise in transactional and litigation matters. The current firm was formed as a result of the 2001 merger of two predecessors, the Chicago-based Sidley and Austin, founded in 1866, and the New York-based Brown and Wood, founded in 1914. Some of Sidley Austin's high-profile clients include Mary Todd Lincoln, then the widow of President Abraham Lincoln, the Pullman Company, and Western Union. By the 1970s and 80s, Sidley and Austin had merged with more than 50 lawyers of Chicago, and by 2001, the firm merged with Brown and Wood, who had offices in the World Trade Center. Sidley Austin is currently the sixth largest U.S.-based corporate law firm with approximately 2,000 lawyers and annual revenues of more than $2 billion. Prior to the merger creating Sidley Austin, Brown, and Wood, which took place just 4 months before the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, the head office of Brown and Wood was in the World Trade Center, while Sidley and Austin New York office was located in offices on 3rd Avenue. Out of 600 employees who worked in the World Trade Center at the time of the attacks, one perished, a switchboard operator named Rosemary Smith. The current offices are located at the AXA Equitable Center at 787 7th Avenue between 51st and 52nd Streets in Manhattan, New York City. Sidley Austin LLP's alumni is as extensive and influential as their high-profile clientele, featuring such high-profile names as Cameron F. Carey, the brother of then Secretary of State John Kerry, former General Counsel of the Federal Trade Commission Bill Blumenthal, Ken Glazer, former Deputy Attorney General under Eric Holder Jr. James Cole, as well as Michelle and Barack Obama. It was men like Thomas Ayers and Gaylord Freeman who helped facilitate Barack Obama's move to the prestigious law firm of Sidley and Austin, where he met Michelle Robinson, who was interning at the firm and being mentored by Bernadine Dorn. At the time, the law firm was counsel to Commonwealth Edison Company, whose president and chairman was Thomas G. Ayers. John Ayers, brother of Bill Ayers, had worked with Michelle Obama in the Community Renewal Society, a civil rights organization and project funder for the United Church of Christ, featuring the Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Working alongside Ayers and Obama was Susan Klonsky from the Communist Front Students for a Democratic Society, whose chairman was her husband Mike Klonsky. But it's Sidley Austin's prominent role in so many high-profile cases that have earned them their status, for better or worse.
I've never seen a stamp like that. I've never used a stamp like that.
Haven't you seen stamps like that in every single one of the documents that you've been shown during this deposition?
Can you get me all the exhibits?
Just a waste of time.
It is a waste of time.
In 2001, Sidley Austin represented the Microsoft Corporation in their antitrust law case versus the U.S. government. The government accused Microsoft of illegally maintaining its monopoly position in the PC market, primarily through the legal and technical restrictions it put on the abilities of PC manufacturers and users to uninstall Internet Explorers and use other programs such as Netscape and Java. In 2015, Sidney Blumenthal, friend and advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, testified before the House committee investigating the 2012 Benghazi terrorist attack. Representative Trey Gowdy of South Carolina claimed there was a financial stake for Blumenthal in Libya as he pressed for Clinton to intervene. Blumenthal was represented by James Cole, former Deputy Attorney General under Eric Holder, and lawyer with Sidley Austin. Eric Holder had long been rumored to be involved with the Black Panther Party, a group that emerged in the late 60s along with the Weathermen. Eric Holder was also instrumental in the Clinton administration's 176 pardons in January 2001, As David Horowitz explains, the beneficiaries of those pardons included such notables as former Weather Underground members Susan Rosenberg, who was involved in the deadly 1981 armed robbery of a Brinks armored car, and Linda Evans, who had used false identification to buy firearms, harbored a fugitive, and was in possession of 740 pounds of dynamite at the time of her arrest in 1985. In 2015, Sidley Austin once again came under fire under allegations that they had failed to reveal false testimony involving Mitsubishi Electronics in their trade secret trial versus Grail Semiconductor. In 2018, the U.S. government attempted to put pressure on U.S. and foreign telecom and internet providers to stop using Chinese tech giant Huawei's telecom equipment, in particular a Chinese company called Hikvision, which specializes in surveillance cameras. Sidley Austin was brought in to lobby against the ban on Hikvision, which sells much of its product on Amazon, who has seemed to, over the years, employ some of the same legal team as Sidley Austin. In May of 2019, federal prosecutors moved to disqualify the former Deputy Attorney General who was defending the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. That man is James M. Cole of Sidley Austin LLP. The New York Times reports that the government contends that Huawei and Ms. Meng Wanzhou, Huawei's chief financial officer and the daughter of its founder, conspired to mislead HSBC and other banks about Huawei's relationship with a company called Skycom in order to circumvent United States sanctions against doing business in Iran. These are just some of many questionable cases in which Sidley Austin LLP has been involved in, often with their own legal team being involved with violations themselves. But perhaps none of these are as alarming as their connection with one long-term client, Europe's aircraft maker, Airbus. Since the early 1990s, there's been fierce competition between two airline and aerospace juggernauts, Airbus and Boeing, with Airbus largely becoming a European consortium and Boeing its American rival, having absorbed McDonnell Douglas in 1997. One particular rivalry is over the model's Airbus A320 versus the Boeing 737. Boeing, as well as their 737 MAX jets, were dealt a huge blow in early 2019 when President Donald Trump announced an emergency order from the Federal Aviation Administration grounding Boeing 737 MAX jets. This came in the wake of the crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, which killed 157 people on board, as well as the 737 MAX 8 operated by Lion Air, an Indonesian carrier, which crashed and killed 189 people. Both flights had reported flight control problems to air traffic controllers just minutes before their planes crashed. The report was the 737 MAX, which had been outfitted with larger engines that could cause its nose to pitch skyward. Boeing added an MCAS, or Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, which is intended to activate and push the nose down when necessary, but because of a faulty sensor, the Lion Air Flight MCAS caused the plane to go into a steep dive. Numerous pilots had complained of the same issue before, and Boeing has since announced that it will release a software upgrade for the 737 MAX, having claimed previously to the FAA that the software was interchangeable with earlier models of the 737, and therefore pilots who were already trained in flying older 737s would not need additional training. Much of the controversy between Boeing and Airbus has to do with subsidies, with Airbus claiming that Boeing receives illegal subsidies through the military, yet at the same time Airbus's parent company, EADS, itself is a military contractor. In 2005, the United States filed a case against the European Union for providing allegedly illegal subsidies to Airbus. 24 hours later, the European Union responded with a complaint against the United States and their support for Boeing. In 2010, the World Trade Organization ruled that European governments unfairly financed Airbus. They also contended that Boeing must repay $5.3 billion of illegal subsidies received from the defense budget and NASA research grants. In March of 2012, the WTO released their findings confirming the illegality of subsidies to Boeing while also confirming the legality of repayable loans made to Airbus. This has since led to a series of suits and countersuits between Boeing and Airbus. This result was achieved thanks in part to Todd Friedbacher, a lawyer and partner who spearheaded the efforts from the Geneva office of Sidley Austin LLP. In 2017, the British Ministry of Defence announced that it intended to award Airbus Defence and Space the single-source contract for the manufacturing, assembly, integration, testing, and launching of a Skynet 6A geostationary military communications satellite. This came along with some criticism, as the MOD had previously stated it was not considering extending the Airbus deal. Airbus parent company EADS and their Astrium subsidiary company Paradigm has given support to British military satellite communications since around 2003. Signal Unit number 1001 was stationed at Royal Air Force Station Oakhanger near Borden, East Hampshire in England. The station has since been decommissioned, closed, and handed over to Paradigm. Paradigm Secure Communications is now known as Airbus Defence and Space. The three sites are now designated TCS Oakhanger, Satellite Ground Station Oakhanger, and Satellite Ground Terminal F4, operated on behalf of NATO. The sites are now used to support the Skynet 5 constellation and the United States Air Force Satellite Control Network. This move was considered highly unusual given that the MOD had previously stated they no longer wanted to use PFIs or privately funded initiatives. This was considered a curious move in a curious location from a curious company, being heavily represented by a curious law firm with a curious alumni, with curious ideals and origins.
There's no way to be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created. I'm not committed to nonviolence in any way.
I'm a teacher now in a community college, and my students will occasionally bring up the war in Vietnam and ask me what my involvement was. And I'll say, well, I helped found an organization whose goal was the violent overthrow of the government of the United States.
I'm not going to tell you, oh, I walked in here this day and put a bomb here, or I made this here, or I blew up this car, or I held up this bank. I mean, there were armed robberies. They were all armed robberies, terrorism. You know, there was all kinds of things that went down that were illegal. So I tell you that we did them, but I'm not going to tell you which ones I did or who did what, because I just can't do that.
The origins of the Weathermen can be traced to the collapse and fragmentation of the Students for a Democratic Society, following a split between office holders of SDS, or National Office, and their supporters, and the Progressive Labor Party. During the factional struggle, National Office leaders such as Bernardine Dohrn and Mike Klonsky began announcing their emerging perspectives, and Klonsky published a document titled Toward a Revolutionary Youth Movement. Klonsky's document reflected the philosophy of the National Office and was eventually adopted as an official SDS doctrine. During the summer of 1969, the National Office began to split. A group led by Klonsky became known as RYM2, and the other side, RYM1, was led by Dohrn and endorsed more aggressive tactics such as direct action, as some members felt that years of nonviolent resistance had done little or nothing to stop the Vietnam War. The Weathermen strongly sympathized with the radical Black Panther Party. The police killing of Panther Fred Hampton prompted the Weathermen to issue a declaration of war upon the United States government. After the Days of Rage riots, the Weathermen held the last of its National Council meetings from December 26 to December 31, 1969 in Flint, Michigan. The meeting, dubbed the War Council by the 300 people who attended, adopted John Jacobs' call for violent revolution. Dohrn opened the conference by telling the delegates they needed to stop being afraid and begin the armed struggle. Over the next 5 days, the participants met in informal groups to discuss what's going underground meant, how best to organize collectives, and justifications for violence. In the evening, the groups reconvened for a mass wargasm, practicing karate, engaging in physical exercise, singing songs, and listening to speeches. The thesis of Weatherman theory, as expounded in its founding document, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows," was that the main struggle going on in the world today is between U.S. imperialism and the national liberation struggles against it, based on Lenin's theory of imperialism, first expounded in 1916 in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. In Weatherman theory, oppressed peoples are the creators of the wealth of empire, and it is to them that it belongs. The goal of revolutionary struggle must be the control and use of this wealth in the interest of the oppressed peoples of the world. The goal is the destruction of U.S. imperialism and the achievement of a classless world communism. The Weathermen were outspoken critics of the concepts that later came to be known as white privilege and identity politics. As the civil disorder in poor black neighborhoods intensified in the early 1970s, Bernardine Dohrn said, "White youth must choose sides now. They must either fight on the side of the oppressed or be on the side of the oppressor." Shortly after its formation as an independent group, Weathermen created a central committee, the Weather Bureau, which assigned its cadres to a series of collectives in major cities. These cities included New York, Boston, Seattle, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Chicago, the home of the SDS head office. The collective set up under the Weather Bureau drew their design from Che Guevara Foco theory, which focused on the building of small, semi-autonomous cells guided by central leadership. In April 1971, the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. The group stole files with several hundred pages. The files detailed the targeting of civil rights leaders, labor rights organizations, and left-wing groups in general, and included documentation of acts of intimidation and disinformation by the FBI and attempts to erode public support for those popular movements. By the end of April, the FBI offices were to terminate all files dealing with leftist groups. The files were part of an FBI program called COINTELPRO. After COINTELPRO was dissolved in 1971 by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI continued its counterintelligence on groups like the Weather Underground. In 1973, the FBI established the Special Target Information Development Program, where agents were sent undercover to penetrate the Weather Underground. Due to the illegal tactics of FBI agents involved with the program, government attorneys requested all weapons and bomb-related charges be dropped against the Weather Underground. The most well-publicized of these tactics were the black bag jobs, referring to searches conducted in the homes of relatives and acquaintances of the Weathermen. The Weather Underground was no longer a fugitive organization and could turn themselves in with minimal charges against them. Additionally, the illegal domestic spying conducted by the CIA in collaboration with the FBI also lessened the legal repercussions for Weathermen turning themselves in. One of those agents was Larry David Grathwohl. His exploits were documented in the 1976 book Bringing Down America, in which he exposed the inner workings of the Weather Underground and the personal activities of many of its members, including Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. Now, I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
From 1969 throughout the 1970s, the left-wing terrorist organization, the Weathermen, carried out a series of bombings, jailbreaks, and riots. October 6, 1969, the Haymarket Police statue in Chicago was bombed. October 8 through 11, 1969, the Days of Rage riots occur in Chicago. November 8, 1969, 2 shots fired at a Cambridge police station. 2 Weathermen, James Kilpatrick and James Reeve, were indicted and subsequently released when a witness recanted his testimony. December 6, 1969, several Chicago police cars were bombed in Chicago. The Weather Underground claimed responsibility as a response to the fatal police shooting of of Illinois Black Panther Party leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. February 16, 1970, a bomb was detonated at the Golden Gate Park branch of the San Francisco Police Department, killing one officer and injuring a number of other policemen. March 6, 1970, Weather Underground members Theodore Gold, Diana Oughton, and Terry Robbins are killed in the Greenwich Village townhouse explosion when a nail bomb they were constructing detonates. The bomb was intended to be planted at a non-commissioned officer's dance at Fort Dix, New Jersey. March 1st, 1971, the Weather Underground bombs the U.S. Capitol in protest to the invasion of Laos. May 19, 1972, the Weather Underground bombs the Pentagon in retaliation for the U.S. bombing raid in Hanoi. The date was chosen for its being Ho Chi Minh's birthday. Once again in 1975, on January 29th, the State Department was bombed. Weather Underground stated that this was in response to escalation in Vietnam. These are just a few of a litany of violent attacks carried out by the Weather Underground, which by 1977 had all but disbanded. Those who had not been killed or arrested retreated into other walks of life, including politics, law, and academia.
They are the cultural centerpiece, that they are the salon. Think Arianna Huffington in Los Angeles with her Hollywood lefty friends. They are the center point of the Chicago social and political scene, and my conviction that they are helped to create and manufacture Barack Obama, the politician, is absolute. It was just hanging out with him, I could just tell. Beyond the book thing, Dreams of My Father, beyond the fact that they launched his career from his house, and they are intimately involved in the movement. Unrepentant terrorist loves Occupy and goes down and gives them pep talks. I think that's significant.
Although the Weather Underground has not been considered officially active for decades, the influence of Dorn, Ayers, the Ayers family, as well as the alumni of the Weather Underground, still remain. From 1991 to 2013, Bernadine Dorn was a clinical associate professor of law at the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwest University School of Law, even though she's not a lawyer. Dorn currently serves on the board of numerous human rights committees and has served as visiting law faculty at the VU University in Amsterdam, that currently boasts a high rate of student internships in companies like Google. Bill Ayers is a retired professor in the College of Education at the University of Illinois at Chicago, formerly holding the titles of Distinguished Professor of Education and Senior University Scholar. They have two adult children, one being Zaid Dorn, a playwright, who in 2010 wrote a short play entitled "'Cause I Know You Got Soul," a nod to Obama. Zaid was named after Zaid Shakur, a Black Panther killed during a shootout with New Jersey police in 1973. Dorn and Ayers also shared legal guardianship of Chesa Boudin, son of Kathy Boudin and David Gilbert. Boudin and Gilbert were former Weather Underground members who later joined the May 19th Communist Organization and were convicted of felony murder for their roles in that group's Brinks robbery. Chesa Boudin went on to win a Rhodes Scholarship. Chesa Boudin is currently a candidate in the 2019 election for San Francisco District Attorney. Chesa's father, David Gilbert, received 70 years to life and is currently still incarcerated. Chesa's mother, Kathy Boudin, was granted parole on August 20, 2003, and was named an adjunct professor at the Columbia University School of Social Work. Jeff Jones, one of the founding members of the Weather Underground, resurfaced in 1981 when he was unexpectedly caught up in a police sweep of individuals suspected of participating in the deadly robbery of an armored truck. He and his wife were arrested. Although Jones received probation and community services, the charges against his wife were dismissed. He has worked as a reporter and editor covering New York State politics and policy. He also runs a consulting firm called Jeff Jones Strategies that specializes in media expertise, writing, and campaign strategies that help grassroots and progressive groups achieve their goals. Jones is also working on the board of the financial arm of Movement for a Democratic Society, or MDS, a group that works closely with the new SDS. He is also a member of the Apollo Alliance. Eleanor Raskin, previously known as Eleanor Stein, was a member of the Weathermen and participated in the Days of Rage. She was an adjunct instructor at Albany Law School. Mark Rood, a political organizer, mathematics instructor, and member of the Weather Underground, taught mathematics at Central New Mexico Community College and is now retired in Albuquerque. Rood has since expressed regret for his role in the Weather Underground and now advocates for nonviolence and electoral change. Kathy Wilkerson, whose father owned the Greenwich Village apartment that exploded on March 6, 1970, taught mathematics in high school and is currently still working with the Students for a Democratic Society. Susan Rosenberg, an activist in the May 19th Communist Organization, was sought as an accomplice in the 1979 prison escape of Assata Shakur. She was also accused of driving the getaway car in the Brinks robbery in 1981, in which 2 police officers and an armored car guard were killed. Rosenberg was sentenced to 58 years in prison on weapons and explosive charges. She spent 16 years in prison, during which she became a poet, author, and AIDS activist. Her sentence was commuted by President Bill Clinton on January 20, 2001. But the connections, particularly between Obama, Dorn, Ayers, and Sidley Austin, are the ones that remain the most unsettling. Another key figure in Barack Obama's meteoric rise was one Newton Minow. Newton Norman Minow, born January 17, 1926, is an American attorney and former chair of the Federal Communications Commission. He was famously known for a speech given to the National Association of Broadcasters Convention on May 9, 1961, where he was extremely critical of television broadcasters, essentially referring to television as a vast wasteland. He served as chairman of the FCC from March of 1961 through June of 1963. He was also chairman of the board at RAND Corporation, an American nonprofit global policy think tank created in 1948 by Douglas Aircraft Company. He received a Bachelor of Science in 1949 from Northwestern University and a Juris Doctorate degree in 1950 from Northwestern University School of Law. Minow has long been active in Democratic Party politics. He's an influential attorney in private practice concerning telecommunications law and is also active in many nonprofit, civic, and educational institutions. In 2016, Barack Obama named him a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was also assistant counsel to Illinois Governor Adlai Stevenson and has sat on the Board of Governors for the PBS, or Public Broadcasting Service, and its predecessor, National Educational Television. He served as its chair from 1978 to 1980. He's also a recent past president of the Carnegie Corporation, an influential PBS sponsor and the original funder of Sesame Street. In 1953, the Carnegie Foundation was investigated as part of the Reese Committee. The Reese Committee was a congressional investigation of major tax-exempt foundations linked to the international money cartel and centered on the Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegie, and Guggenheim foundations. The hearings were held for 2 weeks, then without warning, the committee stopped them. The committee's senior researcher, Norman Dodd, went public about his findings almost immediately after the committee shut down the hearings. The following are excerpts from a 1980 interview with G. Edward Griffin, where he states his findings and the ultimate plans for the taxpayers' contributions to these foundations.
Can you tell us what the Reese Committee was attempting to do?
Yes, I can tell you. It was operating and carrying out instructions embodied in a resolution passed by the House of Representatives, which was to investigate the activities of foundations as to whether or not these activities could justifiably be labeled un-American without, I might say, defining what they meant by un-American. That what we had uncovered was the determination of these large endowed foundations through their trustees to actually get control over the content of American education. That we shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union.
Much of PBS's funding came from the Annenberg Foundation, which sponsored the Chicago Annenberg Challenge, of which Barack Obama was a former chairman and Bill Ayers was a co-founder. Minow was a prominent supporter of Barack Obama's candidacy for President of the United States and had even recruited Obama back in 1988 to work for his law firm. In 2015, a report by human rights workers charged that the APA, or American Psychological Association, was collaborating with the Bush administration officials, including members of the CIA, in enhancing the CIA's torture program. The report drew upon emails from a deceased Rand Corporation researcher named Scott Gerwer. The APA countered the charges that were made by New York Times journalist James Risen and decided to conduct an independent review of whether there was factual support for this claim that the APA was indeed colluding with the Bush administration to promote, support, or facilitate the use of enhanced interrogation techniques by the United States in the war on terror. According to Gerwer's emails, he was working closely with CIA psychologist Kirk Hubbard, who was head of the CIA's Operational Assessment Division and was also a contractor with Mitchell Jessen and Associates, a company linked by Senate investigators to use of torture. One instance of these links between the APA and CIA was the joint sponsorship of a group of workshops on the science of deception held at Rand's Arlington, Virginia offices in 2003. These workshops were organized by Rand's Gerwer, CIA's Hubbard, and APA's then senior scientist Susan Brandon. The CIA claimed that they had no records pertaining to the 2003 workshops, and the New York Times Risen had also failed to release any information pertaining to the event. The Rand Corporation had come under fire before as being the source of the famous Pentagon Papers, as Rand analysts including Daniel Ellsberg had been involved in collecting the papers that made up the famous secret history of U.S. policy in Vietnam. The man put in charge of damage control for this situation was Newton Minow. The man put in charge of the APA's controversial independent review was one David Hoffman of the law firm Sidley Austin LLP. But not only was Hoffman connected to Minow through the think tank Rand Corporation and the CIA, as well as the APA, Newton Minow is senior counsel in the Chicago headquartered law firm of Sidley Austin LLP. While the Weather Underground claimed to be a grassroots organization, its origins were anything but. Most of their members were young, white, educated, privileged, and well-funded, coming from influential families such as the Ayers, Rockefellers, and Minow. Men like Thomas Ayers knew, in order to achieve true power, it was crucial to involve yourself in every aspect of society: industry, shipping, transportation, technology, intelligence, law, academia, media, as well as being involved in civics and human rights issues and keeping on top of the current cultural zeitgeist. And although the Weather Underground is no more, the influence of Dorn and Ayers and their ideologies remain. Consider Valerie Jarrett, former advisor to President Barack Obama. Her late father, James Bowman, a physician, had a lengthy FBI file showing that he was a communist sympathizer and had communicated with a paid Soviet agent named Alfred Stern. Stern was indicted on espionage charges, conspiring to transmit military and political information to the Soviet Union. Jarrett's mother is Barbara Taylor Bowman, who co-founded a Chicago-based graduate school in child development known as the Erickson Institute. Sitting on the board of trustees of the Erickson Institute is Tom Ayers, Bill Ayers, and Bernadine Dorn. Jarrett's grandfather, Robert Taylor, was also from Chicago and was involved with the Chicago Civil Liberties Committee, along with the communist journalist Frank Marshall Davis, another one of Barack Obama's mentors. Jarrett's grandmother, Dorothy Taylor, was an activist with Planned Parenthood. Obama's Green Job czar, Van Jones, was a senior fellow with John Podesta's Center for American Progress, as well as the Apollo Alliance, along with former Weather Underground member Jeff Jones. These are just a few of many examples of how communist ideology still remains in the United States, much of it beginning in the university level, whose young students work their way into internships, and later into partnerships and positions of power in every aspect of our lives, which has led to a heavily biased traditional as well as social media, truly becoming a vast wasteland. Its message being spread through the airwaves and online, all with a little bit of legal assistance along the way. In June of 2019, helicopter pilot Tim McCormick died when his helicopter crashed on the roof of a Midtown Manhattan, New York building. Although McCormick was an experienced pilot, he had not submitted a flight plan and was flying in restricted airspace and in close proximity to Trump Tower. The FAA stated that their air traffic controllers did not handle the flight, which was an Augusta A109E helicopter registered to American Continental Properties, LLC, and its chairman, Danielle Bodini, a real estate magnate with strong ties to Rome and the Catholic Church. Still not much is known about the reasoning for this flight, why it was in restricted airspace, and how it crashed in the first place. The helicopter eventually crashed at 787 7th Avenue between 51st and 52nd Street at the AXA Equitable Building and New York offices to Sidley Austin LLP. Oddly enough, in 2001, the offices of Sidley, Austin, Brown, and Wood were all destroyed in the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center. Just weeks before the attack, Sidley Austin had decided to move its staff of 600 lawyers into a crowded space on 3rd Avenue that would serve as a temporary base for Sidley Austin. An odd move at the time, but a move that would end up saving the lives of over 600 employees. Throughout the decades, law firms such as Sidley Austin have earned themselves a role as a global power player, having a unique and profound effect on global policy, while oftentimes representing some questionable clientele. Whether for better or worse, Sidley Austin LLP has long been a go-to for corporate and government special interest. Currently, Sidley Austin is involved in the college admission scandal, representing Trendera, which is a youth marketing firm, who had allegedly paid $50,000 for someone else to take the ACT college entrance exam. In 2012, Walmart hired former Sidley Austin alumni Jay Jorgensen to become the Senior Vice President and Global Chief Compliance Officer. Over recent years, Walmart has quietly closed nearly 300 of its stores worldwide, publicly announcing that they would be focusing on supercenters and e-commerce, while in other areas claiming that the closures were due to plumbing issues. Much has been made of this issue, with many people claiming that Walmart is conducting suspicious activities in their locations. From talk of tunnel building, unexplained explosions, and military and FEMA equipment being spotted in Walmart parking lots. This theory quickly spread on the internet, with many people documenting their experiences online. This was originally dismissed as a conspiracy theory, but gained steam again in 2018 when Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley made a viral video announcing that young boys were being held at an immigrant detention center at an abandoned Walmart building in Texas.
So I'm standing here in front of Southwest Key Programs Casa Padre, and this is a former Walmart that has been turned into a center for children. So behind those doors inside that Walmart are apparently many hundreds of children.
This disturbing development was promptly blamed on then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the DOJ, and the Trump administration, although it would seem that Walmart's odd construction practices, suspicious closures, and FEMA-related activities go back to the early 2000s. Given the growing human trafficking problem along border states in Mexico, this may put into perspective the 2012 bribery scandal that occurred with Walmex, a subsidiary of Walmart in Mexico. As far back as 2005, officials at Walmart de Mexico allegedly made hundreds of cash payments to government officials in order to obtain building permits in virtually every corner of the country. And while investigators recommended that the probe be expanded, Walmart's leadership shut it down. Then CEO of Walmex, Eduardo Castro Wright, who had been identified as a key figure in the bribery, was instead promoted to vice chairman of Walmart in 2008. This put Walmart's reputation in a tailspin, resulting in an internal investigation into FCPA compliance under pressure from the Justice Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Hired to do damage control was Jay Jorgensen in 2012. From Sidley Austin LLP. In February of 2018, then number 3 at the Justice Department, Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand announced that she would be stepping down. This came at a curious time, as Attorney General Jeff Sessions had already recused himself from the Trump-Russia investigation, now leaving only Rod Rosenstein to oversee Mueller's investigation. There was speculation that Brand had grown frustrated with her limited influence at the DOJ, while others think she may have stepped down due to conflict of interest, considering that her husband, Jonathan Cohn, is partner at the same law firm as Tom Green, who is the lawyer for former Trump campaign advisor Rick Gates. That law firm is Sidley Austin LLP. Rachel Brand currently works as Executive Vice President of Global Government and Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at Walmart. From its origins in Marxism and communism to progressive activism and modern-day socialism, the goals of groups like the Weather Underground have always been clear: to infiltrate society at its root. The nuclear family structure, the educational system, children and youth foundations, human rights organizations, as well as being entrenched in every facet of industry, energy, tech, science, intel, finance and commerce, military, law and law enforcement, print, film, television, and social media, all for the sake of keeping power in the hands of a few under the guise of offering liberation to the common man. Those who would control the weather have always remained underground. One thing is certain: you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
And it's going to mean a lot of white people risking a lot of things when they finally join on the side of the black people and the people of Vietnam and around the world who have already begun the fight.
By creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest.
You will see a procession of game shows, formula comedies about totally unbelievable families, blood and thunder, mayhem, violence, sadism, murder, Western bad men, Western good men, private eyes, gangsters, more violence and terror.
I don't care about an old washed-up terrorist, but as Senator Clinton said in her debates with you, we need to know the full extent of that relationship.
What do you think about the fact that I think you're a terrorist? What do you think about the fact that I think you're a degenerate? You're a degenerate who ought to apologize for what you've done. That's what.
Power belongs to the young people and the black people in this country. Come on, we gotta fight it out. We gotta build a strong base